everyone, and welcome to Space Code Foundation's panel on Women of Color in Space. I'm Nivedita Raju, Director of Legal Affairs and Research. Today, we are celebrating Space Court's third anniversary by inviting our first three speakers from our interview series to share their thoughts. This series was launched at the start of 2021 to highlight the experiences of minority communities in the space sector, beginning with women of color. We're very excited to hear from our panelists today. First up, we have Ruvimbo Samanga. Ruvimbo is a space law and policy analyst specializing in the traditional African and new space industry. She was previously a fellow with Open Lunar Foundation and additionally worked as a research fellow with the UN Economic Commission for Africa on the integration of geospatial and statistical information in the Southern African Development Community. Our next speaker is Alessandra Pacini, a Brazilian-born American space physicist. Her research is focused on solar and heliospheric processes, and her passion is to inspire the new generation of STEM, especially young women and girls. In addition to being a UN Space for Women mentor, she also produces engaging content to inform and entertain STEM audiences with her YouTube channel about space physics for Portuguese-speaking audiences. And she also recently launched a series of activities for Girls in Space 2030. And last but not the least, our third speaker on the panel is Deepika Jayakodi. Deepika is contract officer and bid manager at Airbus Defence and Space Netherlands. She has an advanced LLM in Air and Space from Leiden University, an LLM in International Law and Indian Constitutional Law from Madras University, a diploma in IT, and she's also attended ISU's Space Studies program. She previously co-founded a human rights-based NGO in India and practiced law at the Madras High Court before moving to the Netherlands. So we'll kick off our panel today with a question for all of you. What have your responses been to your interview with Space Court? And can you tell us how public reactions have further shaped your views about the gender and racial hurdles in the international space sector? Maybe we can start with Ru.
Thank you so much, Nivi. It is an absolute honor to be here speaking with such phenomenal women, and most importantly, phenomenal women of color in space. And I think that diversity is such a profound issue of the times. The biggest feedback I've had since I had the pleasure of speaking on this important platform was just the overwhelming response on how much women can do within the industry. But not only that, but to see women who reflect so many lived experiences from all around the world, I think was very encouraging for the community. And as Sally Ride has often said, you can't be what you can't see. So it was great to hear the feedback of just how inspiring it was to connect with all the different voices that have been on the panel so far. So overall, I think that the more voices we get, the more diverse voices we get, the more we can inspire young women and girls to get involved in space. UNOSA actually ran a study quite recently that said that most girls go into their high school careers with a keen interest in the STEM subjects, but ultimately fall short along the journey because of a lack of mentorship and networking opportunities. And I think that goes especially for Africa, where STEM is a relatively untouched terrain for women and young girls. So the more faces that we have to show them that there is a way and to show them that way is going to be very important, I think, in the long term in equipping the future generation.
That's very well said, Ru. And over to you, Ale. We'd like to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with Ru. You know, it's so important to bring diverse faces, diverse voices, diverse backgrounds to this new generation to meet and to dream. But for me, the experience actually, there was another component that popped up from the audience of your interview that was discussing race in Brazil. And you know, I was born in Brazil, in the southeast of Brazil, and I grew up with the identity as a white blonde woman, and I didn't realize that I was a woman of color in Brazil, because my family is we have multiracial families in Brazil, and that's so into our community that we don't really, how we understand ourselves is different. It's very different. So when I start showing and sharing the interview, also raised the question about, are you a woman of color? And I just understood myself as such when I left Brazil and I started living in Finland, and then I came to US and I saw myself as a Latina. I have my family, I have Japanese grandfather, I have Middle East grandparents. So of course I am a woman of color, and now I have this identity more strong, living as a Latina and working as a Latina in the space sector in the US. And that was a great discussion actually that rose from the interview. I really enjoyed it.
That's very interesting, and I think that also kind of points to how complicated it is and how different it is in each one of our countries and our national context as well. Because you kind of have, I mean, of course, race is one of those issues, and you center it, I think, based on your country. So the experiences are, of course, very different. Thank you for sharing that. And Deepika, the same question to you.
So I felt the same as Ru and Ale. So I'm not going to repeat what they've already mentioned. What was distinct for me as a speaker, as well as an audience when I was watching other women of color speak on the series, was that we all had a basis, but we were all so different from each other. And I think that resonated with the audience as well. I had some kids from India tell me that they watched this and they didn't know that there were so many women all over the world doing different things. I remember one child who was particularly excited about the comic book that Ru was working on. And she said, oh, I would like to do that as well. I didn't know you could do that in space. So I think it's inspiring for people who are in different fields, in different ages. And I think that's something that should be considered a success for this series.
Thank you, Deepika. That's beautiful. And I have to add, very heartening to hear. So thank you for saying that. Moving on to your own journey since the episodes were released. Again, maybe we can start with Ru. You recently published a report on lessons that space resource utilization can learn from the African mining industry. Can you elaborate a little bit on your report and its findings?
Certainly. So I wrote this report as a fellow at the Open Luna Foundation, where Nivi also happened to be a mentee of mine there, so pleased to have. And during that fellowship, we were tasked with coming up with a very novel piece of research around lunar development. And I thought of just the basic curve of space development and what Africa would have to contribute to any of these important factors in that curve. And I highlighted that the main nodes of space development are research, innovation, and technology. And while Africa is still to sort of catch up in terms of innovation and technology, I think we can't do without acknowledging the immensely rich research that can come from the continent, given the experiential past that we have in resource development. So I molded my research around in-situ resource utilization on the moon and other celestial bodies, looking at the way that Africa has sort of managed multiple stakeholders and multiple interests in the terrestrial system. And I was able to come up with a lot of synergies in that investigation, which I think were worth noting in an economic model. And this whole research really came about as a result of the fact that space resources are a growing and developing concern, not only for geopolitical issues, but it's also an exciting space development to come in the near future. And we want to be able to manage how states, private actors, institutions, and even private persons will derive benefit from what is an immensely rich resource and valuable resource. Just to give an example of how valuable minerals or resources are on the moon, there is a gas, helium-3, which is in such abundant supply on the moon's surface that it could power the whole world for about 50 years. So you get a sense then of just how I think there's a lot of immense commercial interest in this, but also scientific and perhaps even sociocultural. And we need to find a way to balance all of these. But I focused on the commercial because I think that's an often underlooked area of the law, especially when it comes to space law. And I'm hoping that in line with the recent Space Resources Committee that was established by the UN COPUOS, that this could form a vital point of critical analysis in the way that we manage commercial interests on the moon.
Those are very interesting findings. And for more information, I'd also direct our viewers to read the complete report on the Open Luna website. So Ru, you kind of touched upon this when you were talking about private benefit. Deepika, maybe you could advise us a little bit on what changes we would need from a larger regulatory perspective to give the private sector, especially industry, more room to grow and participate in space.
I think just as we talk about the workforce being inclusive and diverse, there's a need for within the industry to take a more inclusive approach. So we are in a situation where industry doesn't just mean a large scale industry. So today you have small and medium enterprises, you have startups who are equally capable in some things. And I think from a regulatory perspective, it has to be more inclusive to balance the interests of these different stakeholders. And by stakeholders, I don't just mean the industry. They need to think about what is the role of civil society, what is the role of research institutes, what is the role that regulators themselves can play in bringing all of this together. And I think some of the words that we hear more and more these days is about how we can be sustainable, how to make space safe and accessible. And in order to do this, this inclusion is necessary. And from a regulatory perspective, it's not enough anymore that we only have top-down approaches. So it has to, there are things that the industry can play a role in to say, this is how we think we can be more safe and sustainable as responsible actors in space. And I think that's something that we need to do more of. You already see trends happening when it comes to space traffic management, for example. You recently had a sustainability marking, which is a voluntary effort from the industry, where they said, okay, we can think about how we avoid on-orbit collisions, how we deal with end-of-life operations for satellites and so on. And I think it's important to put a more active focus on this, to say that we look at regulatory aspects from the top down as well as bottom up. That we make it more inclusive, more participative, and make sure that the different stakeholders' interests are brought in. So whether they are astronomers who think industry is interfering with their rights, or simply civil society who feels, okay, what is the point? Why are we spending money on these assets and so on? So it's important to highlight these conversations and then bring that into the regulatory realm to say we make space truly something which is for the benefit of all humanity.
That was very well articulated. Thank you. I especially like what you said about the examples of astronomers and civil society as well. So all valuable points that we need to keep in mind. And what you said about the top-down versus a more holistic bottom-up approach, I think is something that will define the future of regulation for our sector. I have a question for Ale next. So, and this is also important given what you said about your personal experience and what you reflected on after the interview. You had mentioned the Girls in Space book, and that was the series was a big part of your episode. And I think that it's gained a lot of popularity through the club over the last year. So after the success of the initiative, what plans do you have for future capacity building for Brazilian girls especially?
Yeah, the Girls in Space book club was a great activity that really it's a highlight of my year personally, because I had the chance to interact with the readers and discuss with them not only the story but also the science content in the books. And actually a little bit of this discussion we were having here with Ru and with Deepika, because we were talking, we can see more now new players in space. Right, yesterday we had, or this week we had these astronauts going just for a little trip, right, in the space and coming back. So kids are really into that and really discussing what's happening in space now, what is our role. So that was really rich for me to be able to discuss with them. And what I realized first, the first idea of the club was just for girls around 10 years old, because that was my target age for the books, and that's when they get disengaged from science. So I target this age group. But then I got so many messages from boys and from girls in other ages that really wanted to participate. So I opened audience to also include these kids. And that was so rich. So I had kids from 7 to 17-year-old in my club, and boys and girls from everywhere in Brazil, and Brazilian kids abroad, like kids from that were living in Europe. And it was so great for them to meet themselves. And they realized that there are other kids interested in space. They were not the weirdos and they were not the nerds, you know, broke a little stereotypes. They interact, and they actually, after that, also create other clubs themselves to keep reading other books and to keep in touch. So it was very, very great opportunity for me to interact. And then what I realized was that I need some book or some content for younger audience, because little kids, 5-year-olds, they also want some content and they want some book, and my stories are more complex for them. So what I did now was write a new book that is going to go part of the series, and discussing exactly the role of space to protect the Earth. So how can we go up and have this perspective of how precious is our planet, how fragile it is, and how important it is for us to look from the space to the Earth and protect our environment here. And it's also a discussion about how not to reproduce the model that failed on Earth on space, since now we are accessing the space more in a different way, right? So that's my new goal with the Girls in Space series, and including this one book for kids around 5 now.
That's so beautiful, Ale. And again, you're actually broadening your audience through this series, so, and sparking more interest in space around the world. So that's really lovely. Again, I would suggest that viewers can look up the series online and order copies for yourselves. So I have a closing question for each of you, and we can start with Deepika this time. So over the next year, what changes do you hope to see for women in our sector across professions?
So there are 2 points that I would like to touch upon as steps that we should take for the next 2 years. And these are quite personal for me. So one is, just in the last month, while we had the World Space Week to highlight women in space and so on, I found it was quite difficult to find women in leadership roles in our sector. It's quite challenging to come up with a list and then say, oh, well, we have all these women here and we could invite all of them for talks and so on. And I thought it's a problem if we really can't find these women. So I would really love for organizations and people to follow along the footsteps of this series, to showcase the women who are doing wonderful things, who are making significant contributions to the space sector. And I think it's quite important, not just for other people who are watching them, but also for the women themselves to feel confident about taking on bigger roles. That's one. And number two, we've had certain instances, sadly, where we've seen that this sector is still not a safe space for women. And I think while we have these big ambitions for humanity, it's very important that we create a safe space here first before we take the next steps. And it's not too difficult. I think it's more to do with the attitude and the willingness to take these steps for protecting or providing a nurturing environment for women who are pursuing a career in this sector. And I think it's important that organizations reach out to each other and provide a space also for women to voice their concerns openly without fearing what it means for them to receive negative comments, maybe backlash if they speak up and so on. So I think that culture really needs to change. And I hope in the next year, we see more of this happening.
That's true. I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said that. Your first point about recognizing our worth, I feel like that that's something that I think we're so used to doing because the bias, because everything, the odds are against us in that sense. And then you add additional hurdles like race and of course, again, in different cultural context and caste and class, I think all of these things kind of add to the oppressions, the interlocking oppressions that each of us face. And so that pushes you down. And so I absolutely agree with you about recognizing the worth in each other and in ourselves. That was very well put. And I think
Maybe
sorry?
Just an additional point, maybe, that I missed out for the first one. The reason why I wanted to highlight the visibility part was I was reaching out to a few women to talk about their experiences in the industry, and some of them refused. And I was trying to find out why this was the case. And they said, well, I'm in this role because of my capability, but I know some people doubt why I'm in this role. And I thought this is just sad that if you know you're capable, that you know why you're in this role, but then you fear somehow that people around you don't think this is where you belong. And I think that's where it ties into the second point as well, to say, okay, the culture needs to change, but it should be okay for women to be visible, to showcase what they are doing. So that's really, it's something that's been bothering me. And I really hope next year, if we talk about this again, that we are able to say, okay, this has changed, at least for some people.
No, thank you for sharing that, Deepika. And I can imagine how frustrating that must have been, being in your shoes and trying to reach out and getting, these responses. And I guess that everyone's kind of on their own journeys and figuring out what those boundaries are, whether it's okay to kind of stand up and, like you said, recognize your value. And I think it'll be a process for many, but it's important to remember that we need to start actively doing that. Otherwise, things are just going to continue to be the way they are. And we need to dismantle these structures. We need to make sure that we burn them to the ground. But yes, I wanted to move to Ale about your thoughts on this as well.
I think Deepika said perfectly these points about visibility, because it's really hard, because most of us that reach at some power positions or a little bit higher in academy or in industry, we are hiding there because we don't feel that we belong. This is so important what you said. And my work with the mentees into the Space for Women network, it's been very great for me, very rich. And I got 3 mentees, one from Brazil, one from Uganda, and one from Norway. And we celebrate the World Space Week by having a webinar. I put them together because I think also part of making the environment more comfortable is also having a network of women in your level and then hold your hand, and you feel that women in different places are being inspired by the same movies, by the same music, by the same astronauts, Sally Ride, you mentioned. So it's important to see yourself and see that you are not alone. And I saw that with the kids, and I saw that with my mentees in the network. And I asked them to make a little presentation about a woman from their country in space. And they had troubles to find these people. Visible. And that was a very, very shocking for me, even for myself, when I try to recommend names and we don't see each other and we are not very highlighted, and we are there. I think there was one first generation that broke the ceiling and got in places that we were not reaching, but now there are women there and is struggling to go up in the ladder, and they are not being visible, and that's part of the problem. So I had the happy experience of putting my mentees together, but also bring these women they selected to attend the webinar. And it was fantastic to discuss the different and the common problems we face in science and space science. So I think what I really want to see in the near future is more girls and young players, young women feeling comfortable in joining this field and coming to space sector. And I really want, and we need more women in power positions. So that's what I hope to see in the future.
Thank you, Ale. I think that a lot of what you said also goes back to Deepika's point about creating those safe spaces, and what you did with your mentees is it's so beautiful, and I think that that is a safe space. You're introducing younger women, younger girls in a professional context, and allowing them to support each other in a professional context. And of course, the Space for Women Network is one of those spaces, but are there more spaces that we can even create, perhaps informally? Maybe that's something to think about going ahead. Ru, same question to you, please.
I am certainly in agreement with everything Deepika and Ali have had to say, especially concerning leadership and visibility. In fact, if I'm to give it a term, I will say that there are two C's that sort of need to be addressed when we look at women's participation in the industry, and that would be confidence and capacity, and they sort of run into one another. Confidence, of course, stems from how secure and knowledgeable you feel, and capacity stems from more of the external, that is, how supported do you feel in terms of personal development. And I think that there needs to be more done in establishing capacity building, whether that's through women's networks, mentorship programs. But I think one often underlooked way of supporting women is women development policy, which I'd love to see more foundations actually taking cognizance of. This could be in the form of anti-harassment policies, anti-discrimination policies, and general personal self-development policies, such as making sure that when women enter an industry or an organization, their career trajectory continues on an incline and they don't sort of plateau on their goals and their skills development. Because I find that most often within these industries, inevitably, the imposter syndrome kicks in and you begin to feel like you're not well equipped. So the only way we can address that is to continue to equip. So it's a constant upskilling and reskilling that's required throughout the job process. But I think that there have been some notable and encouraging progress made. So for instance, the UNOSA UN expert meeting that will be happening at the IAC will be, for me, the first instance of an all-women conference. And it's safe to say that I'm quite excited, and perhaps in follow-up discussions, we can come together to see the veracity of these kinds of initiatives, how effective and efficient they are in highlighting women's needs. And if it's anything to go by, I think that women have a lot to contribute in the sector, be it legal, technical, policy. It's worth coming together to hold hands, as was previously mentioned, and walk that journey together, and hope that the world will also come into or fall into step with us and give us the due support we need as a previously underserved, underprivileged, marginalized community.
Thank you, Ru. I think you captured the spirit of our hopes beautifully. So thank you for that. And again, I think that what you mentioned about anti-harassment policies and these kinds of things that organizations need to actively include, that's maybe a bigger question for us to rethink diversity and inclusion and how organizations address this. What can we do to make sure that we're not just preaching inclusivity, but actually making sure that it's real and practiced in the organization? But thank you all for sharing your thoughts, and thank you to our distinguished panelists for joining us today to share your experiences, so personal and professional as well, and updating us on your journeys. We're really proud of you, and we're so grateful that you're advising us on the future of women of color in space. For our audience, these episodes are available on Space Code Foundation's YouTube channel. You can support us by becoming Patreon subscribers and following us on social media. Thank you all.